Good morning. My name is Adil Raz and I'm the director of the Afghanistan Policy Lab at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. I'm so pleased to welcome you all to this very important conversation on the issue of unveiling the potential of Afghan youth architect of peace and reconciliation. Today's conversation is joined by amazing speakers and moderated by a fellow of the Afghanistan Policy Lab, Ms. Nazila Elmi. Before handing it over to Ms. Elmi, I just wanted to indicate that the Afghanistan Policy Lab has been launched and started to work at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs for about 2 years. And we are focusing on the issues related to Afghanistan. And the 4 areas we're focusing, it's the issue of humanitarian aid, the issue of civic space, gender-related issues, and the 4th is healing and reconciliation. And I'm very pleased that this year we have been dedicated and working thoroughly on the 4th subject. And today's conversation is the start of that series. And as we all have seen the history of Afghanistan, healing and reconciliation has been an important pillar in state building, but unfortunately it was a pillar that was not much paid attention. So our hope is that throughout the series of the discussion and the research and the papers that will be coming out, it will be an important and critical archive for our work in the future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Elmi, but before handing it over, I would like to share with you all her very amazing experience and bio. She is a resident fellow at the Afghanistan Policy Lab, and she has an expertise spans in political science, gender, human rights, international relations, and policy research. She has an MA in Human Rights Studies from Columbia University and a BA in Political Science and International Relations from TED University. Over the years, Nazila has contributed to various projects benefiting Afghan women while in Afghanistan and abroad. Committed to addressing the crises in Afghanistan, she has actively participated in analytical advocacy initiatives. Nazila was one of the 10 rapporteurs who drafted the outcome document of the 12th UNESCO Youth Forum. Her publications available in different languages cater to policymakers in Afghanistan globally. Nazila's research draws on local wisdom, delving into themes of human rights, discourse, national healing, multi-directional memory, intersectionally, and deconstructing dominant narratives in Afghanistan. And we're very pleased that she is at the Afghanistan Policy Lab. And Nazila John, handing it over to you for moderation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ross, for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone joining us from all across the world today. And we welcome Dean Jamal Amani. We've been waiting for you. Welcome Ambassador Ross, our distinguished colleagues, panelists, and guests to our virtual panel, Unveiling Potential Afghan Youth as Architects of Peace and Reconciliation. My name is Nazila Elmi, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's important discussion. As you all know, the plight of Afghan youth mirrors that of the broader population in Afghanistan. About 64%, almost 2/3 of Afghans are under 25 years of age. They represent the future of Afghanistan, and yet they are effectively excluded from meaningful participation in discussions about their future, how it will unfold, who will have a say, and what it will mean for them. They have the most to gain or lose by defining and building a lasting peace and being included in the generation, design, and implementation of peace programs for Afghanistan. Their engagement under the current regime presents significant challenges and significant political challenges. Today, we hope to explore many sides of this reality. And as we explore this topic, we are joined by our distinguished experts, Graham Simpson, author of Youth Progress Study for the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250. We're also privileged to have Nimatullah Ibrahimi, a senior lecturer in international relations at La Trobe University from Australia, and it's quite late there, so thank you so much for joining us. Let's also welcome Sumaya Tora. Sumaya is the founder of the Dosti Network and the first Afghan Rhodes Scholar. And finally, we are very happy to have our colleague Barakatullah Rahmati, a career diplomat and fellow at Afghanistan Policy Lab. Without further ado, I would like to start with Graham Simpson. to provide us with an understanding of UN Security Council Resolution 2250, as well as the YPS agenda, and also the soon-to-be adopted Declaration on Future Generations. And let me shortly introduce him. I would not do justice, but Graham Simpson is the director of Interpeace USA and senior advisor. Just a sec, I'm so sorry. Just before we start, I would like to give the floor shortly to our Dean, Dean Jamal. I think you have my name on your screen, and it's my bad because I sent my own link to you.
There we go.
There we go.
No, thank you so much, Nazila. And I'm sorry that you were, please don't interrupt your welcoming and introductory remarks. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you this morning. I'm really happy that the semester, our commencement has ended, so I can be here. I just want to sort of echo all my gratitude to all of you for joining us, to Ambassador Raz for directing the initiative, and to Nazila for putting together this wonderful program. We're just absolutely deeply honored that this conversation, this very important conversation, is continuing. And I'm here just to showcase my support as much as I can be with you this morning, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for honoring us with your participation. Thank you. And just to carry on with my introduction, yes, I will restart. Graham Simpson is the director of Interpeace USA and senior advisor to the Director General of Interpeace, a global peacebuilding organization working in 20 conflict and immediate post-conflict zones around the world. He's also an adjunct lecturer in law at Columbia University, where he teaches a seminar on transitional justice and peacebuilding. Throughout his professional life, Graham Simpson has focused on experiences, roles, and agency of young people in peacebuilding and conflict, and has published extensively on this subject. Graham has actively sought mechanisms of participation for young people and children in transitional justice processes, including through commissions, and under his guidance, the International Center for Transitional Justice launched a program for youth and children in transitional justice. Graham, your work has highlighted the critical role of youth in peace and security worldwide. I've had the honor of taking your class at Columbia as your student, and I'm very grateful you're here to share your knowledge with a wider Afghan audience. You authored the Youth Progress Study in 2018 pursuant to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250, which was the first resolution to recognize young people as architects of peace and agents of peace. YPS also used a uniquely participatory research process and consultations with over 4,200 young people across the world, 180 of which were young Afghan men and women. Your study asserts, and I quote, young people across the globe articulated the view that peace and security are more than just the absence of violence, and as such are of universal concern. They stressed the importance of ending violence and addressing its symptoms, as well as engaging the underlying causes of corruption, inequality, and social injustice. Tell us about this progress study. What has been the impact and what has changed since?
Thank you, Nazila, for that overly generous introduction. You'll notice that nothing that Nazila said lays any claim to knowing anything compared to the other people in this room about Afghanistan. I'm not an expert on Afghanistan. The gravest error we could make is speaking on behalf of young people in Afghanistan rather than listening to them. So my reference point to the progress study is rather by reference to a broader sort of process, in the hope that perhaps this has some resonance with Afghanistan, but the real challenge going forward should be to replicate this kind of study, this kind of participatory consultative process with young people in Afghanistan itself. And we should be localizing this agenda and bringing it to the local level so that it's we don't continually make the error of talking about the marginalization and exclusion of young people and then marginalizing and excluding them in the process. I do want to say one thing about this. When we talk about the progress study on youth, peace and security, when we talk about Security Council Resolution 2250 and the other Security Council resolutions on youth, peace and security, the Pact for the Future or the Declaration on Future Generations, the common agenda of the Secretary General or the new agenda for peace, these are all ethereal, vision-based policy documents. And we have to be incredibly careful that we don't dive into conversations that are abstracted from the lived experience of ordinary young people in conflict-affected societies, because this varies dramatically from context to context. So with that in mind, I want to emphasize that the Youth, Peace and Security agenda is not the construction or the invention of the international community at the UN Security Council. Even UN Security Council Resolution 2250 was the product of the mobilization of young people around the world and the recognition of the fact that the UN system and the multilateral system in general had really excluded this massive population in most conflict-affected societies, by far the majority of people, who were really marginalized and excluded from these processes. At its heart was a recognition of the fact that this had produced a very expansive and systematic level of distrust, both of young people by their communities and very often of young people in their institutions, in their states, in their governments. The distance between young people and governance was a real problem. And I think this was recognized in the progress study. And I think in Security Council Resolution 2250, I mean, the real attribute of this was to call for a study which focused on the positive contributions of young people to building peace. A recognition that we shouldn't just be thinking about young people as a sort of demographic, but we should be thinking about how can we translate this demographic dividend into a peace dividend. And in fact, it was really interesting because one of the dominant I will hopefully represent young people's voices around the world in this, so that you're not hearing me, but hearing them through me as a proxy. One of the dominant concerns that young people expressed was the real problem of these stereotypes, in which very often gendered stereotypes, in which a young man with a gun was presented as the sort of quintessential youth, a threatening risk, spoiler, a dangerous a problem to be solved. And young women often consigned to the status of passive victimhood. And one of the dominant concerns was young people saying both of these discourses really hid their agency and their creativity as constructive contributors to peace. They saw them just as products of or propagators of violence. One of the consequences of this was this incredible sense that young people were a threat, young people were a source of danger, they were a problem to be solved, and it produced this policy panic, which saw either young people, this demographic bulge, as dangerous in societies rather than as an asset. It saw young people migrating across borders as a threat and a danger. And in particular, it cast all young people in conflict-affected societies as potential recruits into terrorist organizations. And actually, it's a tiny sliver of young people who choose those paths, who find their ways into violent underworlds. And the vast majority, they aren't all, dedicated peace builders, but the vast majority of young people love peace as much as the rest of us. And this was a really powerful message that came out of the study. I should emphasize, this was not a study which was, I think the UN was dragged kicking and screaming into a conversation with young people, which involved listening to young people. So I was very emphatic as the independent author of this, that this couldn't be a desk study in which we spoke about young people. But we built a coalition of organizations, peace-building organizations with trust-based access to young people and youth groups on the ground, and spent 2 years listening to those young people. 281 focus groups across 44 countries, 7 regional consultations with young people, 35 country-specific studies about youth in those particular contexts, consultations with member states and UN entities and agencies across the board. This is really important because I think what came out of this was this extremely important youth voice. One of the most important things they taught us was that we need to understand what they called the violence of exclusion. And they talked about exclusion being about political exclusion, marginalization from economies that did not speak for them and include young people, exclusion from education systems. Nowhere is that more evident for young women than in Afghanistan. Exclusion from a rights agenda and a human rights environment that should protect them, but very often didn't. And this comprehensive notion of exclusion was really important, because what young people are saying is, unless we address the structures of their marginalization, all of these dimensions of their lives. They used to say every SDG is a youth SDG. Don't ghettoize us. Don't look for us just in these places. Don't just look for youth in youth organizations. We are in women's organizations. We're in human rights organizations. We're in civic organizations. We're in religious communities. We're in the security forces and the communities being policed by those security forces. So this access to young people and this experience, this diverse experience of exclusion, was really powerful. And I guess finally what they said to us very powerfully were two things. Until we deal with the violence of exclusion, we will never prevent the violence of extremism. And the focus there was very much on saying this should not be about securitized, repressive responses to young people who are protesting and dissenting and who are agents of change. We need to embrace this. We need to see this as the creative, resilient, and resourceful contribution that young people can make to peace, instead of seeing this as a threat. And so this very powerful message was the dominant discourse, I think, that came out of this. And I hope it has some relevance and meaning in the Afghan context. And then I'll finish with this, Nazila. The other thing that young people said is they said, we offer an unbelievable missed opportunity. Instead of treating us as a threat, instead of constantly seeing us as a risk, actually the investment in the resilience and resourcefulness of young people, the discovery of all of the innovative ways in which young people are building peace against all the odds in situations where civic space is shut down, where their voices are often marginalized and brutalized. They were saying there's such innovative creativity there. They showed us and described how they work across all typologies of violence: gender-based violence, terrorist violence, criminal violence, all of the dimensions of conflict in a society. They demonstrated how they are integral to all the phases of conflict: early intervention models around prevention, through to post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation, where young people are saying, don't talk about us as the future. We are very mindful of the fact that it is our action in the present that shapes that future. And yes, we may be guardians of the future, but deal with us in the present. Based on that, there were a series of recommendations about youth inclusion, about investment in youth peace and security, about the partnerships that we need to foster with young people. There was no one size fits all. There was a very clear sense that the civic space, the political opportunities are going to vary from context to context in terms of what is possible. But I think the youth peace and security agenda, at very least, provoked this conversation by rendering young people audible and visible in their own voice very much for the first time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Graham, for your very comprehensive explanation of this missed opportunity. That caught my attention very well when I was reading the YPS and speaking to diverse experiences of youth. And speaking about demographic bulge, young people deemed as threats, especially when they dissenting young people, which ties it really well to Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi's study. And we're very privileged to have him from Australia today. Let me shortly introduce him as well. Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi is a senior lecturer in international relations at La Trobe University. He teaches subjects on Middle East politics, international organizations, and security. His research includes political violence, peace building, social movements, human rights, and transitional justice. Dr. Ibrahimi completed his PhD in 2018 at the Australian National University, where his doctoral research examined the dynamics of contentious politics in post-2001 international intervention in Afghanistan. From 2018 to 2020, he worked as an associate research fellow at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization at Deakin University. Previously, he worked for several leading think tanks and organizations, including International Crisis Group, the Crisis States Research Center for London School of Economics. Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi, thank you very much for joining us. And in a piece you co-authored with Booz and Vision, Youth Protest Movements in Afghanistan Seeking Voice and Agency, you talk about grassroots youth protest movements in post-2014 elections. You also give us insight into the 2014 Afghanistan National Youth Policy. As the rest of the many gains of the past 20 years, unfortunately, this initiative has lost traction with the Taliban takeover in 2021 as well. in absence of education and access to basic rights and civic space, we see young women, girls, and young men protesting and defending the Taliban policies. And since day one we have been seeing them protesting the Taliban since day one of the takeover. Tell us if you see any prospects at all for today's youth movements having any success under the Taliban. If so, what would they be?
Thank you so much, Nazila. Thank you, everyone at Afghanistan Policy Lab, especially Ambassador Ross, for organizing this event, the initiative for keeping Afghanistan in the agenda of international community, which is, I think, currently a huge task, given the huge number of challenges that are happening around the world. I think Afghanistan is almost gradually being forgotten. I think the youth, especially, is it, I think, really an important topic of discussion and consideration. I think I would like just to maybe, to respond to that question, draw some general context between what is happening now since August of 2021 and the period of the Republic since 2001 until 2021. Well, generally speaking, in terms of context, Afghanistan is, I think we should remember, one of the most youthful country, one of the youngest countries in the world, with an average median age of 19, which is one of the highest among the least developing countries. By way of contrast, for developing country, for the developed world, it is usually around 40. For Afghanistan, it is 19, so something around 19. So it's really one of the youngest populations in the world, if you look at the sort of the median age structure by comparison. And historically, I think young people has always been one of the victims of periods of instability, violent conflict, regime changes, and often young people are also the targets of ideological regimes that try to either ideologically reorient the youth according to their policies and programs, or if they don't fit within their frameworks of rule, repress them, subject them to repression. So with that in mind, I think, looking at the legacy of the Republic between 2001 and 2021, I think there is one important point that has to be made. I think that, although there was a wide gap between the Republic's philosophy, discourses, and ideas and practices, but in general, the Republican system of government and the structure which were put in place created a lot of opportunities for young people, which were, I think, historically unprecedented. So I think, again, this is speaking in relative terms. I'm comparing Afghanistan of 2010 with Afghanistan of the 1990s or 1980s before that. So I think if you look at with all figures in terms of educational opportunities, expansion of schools, universities, social mobility, and connection with the outside world, I think it is during this period that Afghanistan's young people really experienced, an unprecedented number of opportunities. And obviously, it was during this time, especially towards the end of the Republic, we also see a huge gulf between different youth people, different youth groups, people who are living in Kabul, some other provinces who are more affected by Taliban insurgency, violence. People didn't have the same level of opportunities. So I think we should acknowledge that level of, I think, significant differences as well. But in general terms, I think the Republic provided quite significant level of opportunities for the young people. And then by 2014, we see a period of really important upsurge in youth activism in Afghanistan. We see, for example, the protest movement, which emerged around the killing of Farkhunda Malikzada in Kabul. Those of us who were in Kabul, we saw young people taking to the streets. And then we saw the Tabassum protest movement, the Enlightenment protest movement, and the Rasakhezi Tahrir uprising for change in 2017. So just to name a few. But I think if you were someone in Kabul, because I was researching many of this protest movement, you would very often see some young people gathering outside parliament, outside the presidential palace, protesting. And youth people are also forming associations just to express their voice and agency. So why was it that this was happening during this particular period in 2014 onwards? And I think as we discussed in that report, which I co-authored with my colleague, Dr. Nematullah Bijan and Sergey Bose, it is after the formation of the National Unity Government when we see a widening gap between the government legitimacy and capacity and young people's aspirations and expectations. And I think young people are becoming more informed, more educated, more connected, more mobilized, socially active. But the government faces more challenges in terms of its capacity and legitimacy to respond to these sort of challenges. So that gap, I think, explains why we see this surge in protest activities by young people during those years in Afghanistan. So, as I said, the Republic had a number of discourses, ideas, languages that talked about the young people. There was a national youth policy, which was adopted in 2014. And there were also specific structures which were created within the system of government to promote young people. I think President Ashraf Ghani, especially in terms of languages, the way he talked about young people, I think was quite placing quite a lot of emphasis on young people, even though many people might disagree with his practices. But in terms of the language and discourses, I think young people, gained center stage in policy discourses. Then in the period after August of 2021, the fall of the Republic, the return of the Taliban to power, I think we see some fundamental changes, which are, many of which were, I think, obvious. I would like to elaborate on a few of those before handing over to the next speaker. One, in terms of institutional structure, the Taliban has retained some of the institutional structure for young people. For example, the Office of the Deputy Minister for Youth Affairs and the Ministry of Information and Culture is retained. As in other positions, there is a Maulavi who is appointed as the Deputy Minister. And that office has been rather effective, active in some sort of organizing some programs and speaking to the media about young people. And some of the programs were quite interesting. I found was that they have been promoting training, training young people to become freelancer in global job markets through some platforms like Amazon and other places. So there was a big event they organized recently in Kabul. They have also done similar training programs in other parts of Afghanistan, which I find quite interesting because they are also sort of adapting this neoliberal policy of empowering young people through some training and then giving them, releasing them to the world market, go find, job opportunities for yourself. But other than that, I think there has also been recently this talk of a new Taliban plan or directive, which was apparently approved by the Taliban leader, Mullah Hibatullah Khanzada, in late October of 2023, which is targeting the young people. So I haven't seen the document. I have only been hearing about it through media interviews, some excerpts of it coming out in public. But generally, according to, again, the Deputy Minister of Information and Culture, Maulana Rashid, it focuses on 4 specific areas. One, it is sort of reforming, what they call Islahi Fikri, like intellectual or mental reform of the young people, economic reform, youth social mobilization, and all of those things. But if you look at all of these discourses which are coming, I think there is a fundamental difference between the way the Republic talked about the young people and the way the Taliban talk about the young people. The Republic, again, I'm talking about the language discourse. They talk about the young people as having voice, agency, participation, inclusion, pluralism, human rights, all of those things. But the way the Taliban talks about it, about the young people, it is a very sort of ideological, top-down manner. They again, some of the officials have explicitly said, we do not want the young people to be protesting, right? Neither against the Republic nor for neither against the emirate nor for the emirate, which means they want them to be silenced, right? And that has also been through their practice of repression of young women who have been protesting against the Taliban's policies during this period. So this is like in terms of youth policy specifically, but there are also, I think, the wider context, I think we should also talk about in the way those wider Taliban policies affect young people. I think we should talk about, for example, gender apartheid, the way the Taliban is instituting a system of gender apartheid that is discriminating against women and girls in all walks of life, including through education, in system of education. I'm not going to go through details of that. I think we all know what they do, but the point here is that how that affects young women and girls. And we should also talk about in terms of the wider context about how the Taliban is really structuring, reforming the education system. The education curriculum is fundamentally being reformed. Many subjects are being sort of de-emphasized, reduced. New subjects are being introduced, which are sort of promoting the Taliban's sort of way of ideological framework. And at the same time, there's also a massive expansion in the number of madrasas in Afghanistan. And many of those madrasas are also called, I think quite interestingly, jihadi madrasas. Many state schools across many provinces have been turned, teacher training institutes have been turned into madrasas. Maulawis are appointed to teach in those madrasas. I think recently I saw in northern Afghanistan, a women dormitory was turned into madrasa, jihadi madrasa, I think, if I remember correctly, in the province of Jawzjan. So there are many, all of those things. And then we should also talk about, about the Taliban's, exclusionary structure of power and the way it affects not only women, but also members of other ethnic and social and cultural groups, like especially young people of Hazara background, many Uzbeks, Tajiks, and other smaller minorities are especially, I think, excluded from the Taliban's way of governing the country, which not only affects the youth policy, but in the broader system of government. I'm talking about how they affect these different groups in a very systematic way. So just to conclude, I think, in the broader, if you look at all of this, what is a general sort of message that you can gather from all of this various intervention? The Taliban's view is that, over the previous 20 years, during 2001 and 2021, the young people of Afghanistan were corrupted, as the society was more generally, by Western cultural influences. And now their mission is to reform the young people, to re-educate them. We might call them like brainwashing or reprogram them in a way that is fitting within the Taliban's sort of way of defining the country. So, and I think that means that there is a fundamentally different view. The Republic, as I said, try to at least discursively promote youth as a sort of force, with agency, but the Taliban systematically denies that sort of voice and agency by young people as having any influence in politics, society, or culture of the country. So I think with that, I would like to conclude. Maybe we can come back to some of these questions I have raised later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahimi, on that very important insight in mentioning intersectional marginalities of young people in Afghanistan and talking about the current radicalization of youth. I'll come back to you on those, but for now, I would like to briefly introduce Sumaya and move on to her. Sumaya is the founder of Dosti Network, an organization dedicated to empowering Afghans, both within Afghanistan and those living as refugees, with crucial resources and education. As an Afghan refugee who has personally experienced displacement, Sumaya possesses an intimate understanding of the challenges faced by displaced individuals, which fuels her drive to actively engage in refugee resettlement and advocate for access to education for students affected by conflict and displacement. In response to the fall of the Afghan government in 2021, Dosti Network launched a global effort to connect Afghans with essential resources for resettlement worldwide and to provide support to those remaining in Afghanistan. Sumaya has worked with organizations such as the World Bank, Malala Fund, United Nations, Schmidt Futures. Sumaya's achievements include being the first Rhodes Scholar from Afghanistan and obtaining Masters in Public Policy and International Human Rights Law from the University of Oxford. She holds a BA in Economics and Peace and Global Studies from Earlham College. She's an Echoing Green Fellow listed in BBC 100 Women 2023, Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, and recipient of the Open Society Prize. Sumaya, it's a joy to have you with us today. I have done a little more research beyond that and beyond what I just said. And I found out that you have done peacebuilding projects since high school and have survived an attack at the Serena Hotel, again as a high school student. You've also authored your undergraduate thesis on reimagining peace in Afghanistan and have been at the forefront of working groups to address the current crisis. Before the Republic's downfall, your academic work has centered on understanding peace perspectives within Afghanistan and documenting the viewpoints of individuals from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. Often within the current context of Afghanistan, peace and reconciliation has been understood as further engagement with the Taliban, even if it offers continued impunity for their actions. Has this been the right approach so far? What might be some initial constructive steps towards building the enabling conditions for future peace? Perhaps steps that Afghan youth can help take, considering that Afghan youth are not a monolithic group and come from different backgrounds, orientations with different demands and needs.
Thank you so much, Nazila John. And thank you so much, Ambassador Adila Raz, for holding this panel at such an important time. And thank you to Professor Graham and Professor Ibrahimi for laying the groundwork for this panel. I think they've both shared excellent insights, and I would hope I don't repeat some of it. So to answer your question, Nazila, I think whether the peace and reconciliation process that's happening maybe right now or over the years since the founding of Afghanistan, the Republic of Afghanistan, the straightforward answer, whether the process has been right or not, is no, it has not. And it clearly has not been, which is why we are currently facing the widespread atrocities and human rights violation by the Taliban today. Between 2018 and 2020, my academic work focused on understanding how Afghans from various age groups, ethnicities, and socioeconomic backgrounds understood peace and the peace process. I was very interested in understanding people's perspective who were not necessarily in what I call the political elite circle, and that led me to do a lot of my work actually going around Kabul and different cities, randomly talking to people on the streets and finding people that I didn't know and sparking a conversation about what they thought peace should look like in Afghanistan. And while I was conducting some of my interviews in 2019, right actually before the elections, it was an extremely difficult time because there were several bomb attacks happening and a very unsafe period. I discovered at the time that there was a stark divide between what the mainstream media narrative was and what the ongoing political discourse was versus the actual viewpoints of some of the ordinary people that I would speak day to day about the understanding of peace. And I think it is very important for me to share some of these findings because in order for us to not repeat some of the similar mistakes that were made during the time of the Republic. So one of the main findings that I had was that many ordinary Afghans who are not necessarily involved in politics or were not necessarily, in the bubbles of academia, did not actually fully grasp the ongoing peace process. And a significant amount of them actually expressed a high level of mistrust towards the process. And there have been many surveys that have been conducted about the perception of peace, but also whether Afghans felt represented in the peace talks or not at the time of the Republic. Some of them were conducted by Asia Foundation, and there are several other surveys. And actually more than half, and in some instances, more than 70% of the respondents said that they did not feel represented during these peace talks. And this is important to note. If sentiments towards peace talks was this low under the Republic, we can only imagine how much worse it is now, given the ongoing atrocities and human rights violations that are occurring under the Taliban regime. And Professor Ibrahimi laid out some of those already. And so the peace process in Afghanistan historically has often been a top-down approach, usually driven by a group of political elites and external actors without significant grassroots engagement. This lack of inclusivity meant that the voices of ordinary Afghans, particularly those from marginalized groups such as women, ethnic minorities, and rural communities, have largely been absent. This disconnection between the political negotiations and the lived experiences of many Afghans have fueled a widespread skepticism and also a distrust. And Professor Graham did a great job of laying out some of the research that has gone in across various countries to show that how distrust is fueled among the youth because of exclusion. And that is very important to note. And that was something that was actively happening under the Republic as well. To the second point about regarding the abrupt fall of the Republic and the Taliban's takeover, to your question, this event was something that was unimaginable for many young Afghans. It has left numerous young people, both within Afghanistan and those now living in the diaspora, with deep level of mistrust, not only towards the US policies, but also towards political leaders whose decision many still blame for the current state of affairs. And some of the impact on Afghan youth has been profound. They feel that both the Taliban and the former republic's political representatives who are often involved in high level of corruption should also be held accountable for the ongoing injustices. The inclusion of many voices, including those of women, girls, young people from ethnic minorities, and different socioeconomic backgrounds. The exclusion from the peace process has been extremely damaging. Including these voices might have led to led to a more inclusive understanding of peace, and maybe potentially prevented the harsh return of the Taliban. I just want to go into some of the specific consequences of exclusion faced by the young people during the peace process under the Republic. And now currently, because of the failure of the peace deal, there have been several negative impacts on the young people. So number one being psychological impact. So the abrupt change in political power has led to widespread trauma, anxiety, and a sense of hopelessness among the youth. The uncertainty about their future under a regime known for its harsh policies has been overwhelming. Women and girls have been at the front of taking most of the violence and exclusion in the society at the moment. As Professor Ibrahimi mentioned, the current state at which women and girls are being excluded, it could be legally and potentially could be recognized by the ICC as a gender apartheid. There are movement for that recognition as well. women have faced significant educational setback, and other than these, there are also economic hardships that young people are facing because of lack of job opportunities. The country has significantly faced brain drain. Lastly, and the most sad one is social and political disillusionment. So the perceived betrayal by both international actors and domestic political elites has deepened youth's disillusionment with politics. Many feel that their voices were ignored and their futures bargained away without their consent. So these previous approach to peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan that failed has led to this time of egregious atrocities and violations being committed by the Taliban. And it has only increased the mistrust among the youth. And in order for us to, moving forward, in order for us to have a conversation of peace and reconciliation under the current regime, it's very important that the process is inclusive and accountable. This means genuinely engaging with diverse range of voices, particularly those of the youth from the communities that have historically been marginalized, and to rebuild trust and foster a more sustainable and just peace. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sumaya, for your very insightful remarks, and thank you for addressing the human rights violations and atrocities. It's never enough to mention them and address them, and the psychological consequences and the impacts as well of living under the Taliban tyranny, and also political disillusionment, which ties really well with what I'm going to come back to you on that later. But as we move on with our second round in this panel, I would like to address a question to Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi on the very idea of political disillusionment itself. I hope you're still there. Hi, yes. In your work, you've mentioned that young people prior to August 2021 believed the international community prioritized the security of the country over democracy and adherence to democratic norms and principles. You also observed, and I quote, Afghan youth who welcomed the presence of international community after 2001 felt betrayed by the international community and lack of their support for their movements. The context now is radically different under the Taliban rule. How can the US and the international community more meaningfully support the efforts of youth and peace building in Afghanistan?
Thank you for that question, Nazila. I think bring that question about how the young people perceive the whole enterprise of state building, international intervention, nation building in Afghanistan, and how the international actors see that. I think the international actors, were shifting between different agendas of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, and were primarily focused, with security objectives. And at the end, we know how the US withdrew from Afghanistan and how that sort of led to the collapse of the Republican system of government in Afghanistan. Now, many people might argue that the Republic collapsed because it didn't have the local support or widespread legitimacy within Afghanistan. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's a distinction to be made between the practices of the Republic, the people who are in power and how they were governing the country, and the idea of the Republic. I think I still would like to argue that the Republic as a system of government was legitimate, were quite widespread, had widespread support across Afghanistan, and the young people especially, had especially putting a lot of efforts in consolidating, institutionalizing, and sustaining that system of government where they had a say in how the country was being run by those who were in power. So now coming back to the great point Sumaya made, the young people in Afghanistan, like everybody else, feel betrayed. They are traumatized. They are feeling betrayed by their, political elites who are in charge of the government. They are feeling betrayed by the international community. And there is a profound sense of disillusionment. And I think, again, now looking at the youth in Afghanistan, the general population, we should also sort of talk again the sort of, intersectionality of how the Taliban's policies affect different groups very differently. In the systematic denial of human rights, and all of those things, I think, are affecting everyone in Afghanistan. But I think certain policies in Afghanistan by the Taliban affect certain groups more than the others. So now, looking forward, I think this challenge is before us is still more or less the same. Is the international community seeking to achieve certain short-term pragmatic goals, which sometimes may, according to some, mean engaging with the Taliban, right? And finding some ways of working with the Taliban in order to sort of stabilize the country and achieve a short-term stability. But in a long term, I think sort of view, I think coming from within Afghanistan is to start a serious conversation about long-term peace, sustainable peace, inclusive peace. And in that space, I think young people, must be front and center of any sort of future initiative. I think whether it is from the conversations that are taking place in Doha or in capitals around the world. I think young people have to be in the center of all of this discussion. We should not repeat the mistakes of Bonn. We should not repeat the mistakes of the way the republic was governed. And as a result of that, international community has to sort of support ways in which various segments of the Afghan society, including young people, women, men, can come together and express their views and aspirations for the long term. And I think, again, coming back to this whole, again, idea of education, as someone who is observing Afghanistan, have been looking at education policies in Afghanistan over many years, I'm really concerned with the way the Taliban's system of, policies of education is affecting the young people in the country. It has sort of creating the long-term risks for a new wave of radicalization in Afghanistan, with quite significant and disastrous consequences in terms of security for Afghanistan, for the region, and for the world. I think, as much as politicians might think, Afghanistan is over, we have other priorities. But I think, this sort of, from experience, we can see that sort of, exposure of young, vulnerable, traumatized people to extremist ideologies and systematic manner can have really long-term significant consequences. So for that, I think it is really important to be at the center of, education and new efforts. I think there's already efforts by many volunteers, NGOs, and diaspora groups trying to promote alternative system of education, trying to create opportunities where people can, be learning differently than those which are offered in Taliban madrasas. Those sorts of initiatives, I think, must be supported, created, further amplified. But I think, and again, coming back to, again, the conversation which is taking place in Doha, I think next month, there's another conversation. What we are seeing from all sides is that all of these UN-led peace conversations are sort of repeating the same mistakes, talking to the people who are in position of power, who hold the gun, excluding others, even if there are certain groups, it is often very symbolic, who are consulted in this sort of process. So I think young people, their aspirations and their roles and agencies must be really central to all of these political peace initiatives and development and education policies in Afghanistan.
Yes, thank you very much, and for talking about the traumatization of young people right now and their exclusion. That's a great segue to a question I was going to direct to Sumaya. Sumaya, in one of your interviews I read, you mentioned the entire narrative with this crisis has been one of pity for Afghans, and what we deserve is equal dignity and respect. And young Afghans, of course, have experienced disproportionate victimization and traumatization due to conflict, and forced migration and displacement. And Dr. Nemat Ibrahimi talked about the aspects of education as well, and the current imposition of radical and extremist ideologies. And the current narrative has not made things any better for them. Your organization, DOSTI, addresses these issues very creatively. How are the young people you work with are reacting and responding to the current situation?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I recently spoke with, I was having a conversation with a young Afghan woman, and she said something very heartbreaking, which was, I'm spending the prime time of my life fighting for the most basic rights rather than having a moment to be young and live my life. This sentiment sort of captures the reality of many young people who are living in Afghanistan, and especially women and girls. They're currently the most marginalized and bearing the brunt of what we have been discussing, the failed peace process, the republic, and also the current regime's ongoing violent assault on their rights and dignity on a daily basis. They're deprived of the fundamental rights such as education, employment, and even the freedom to walk around the city freely. So, and this year marks 3 years of women fighting for their rights. So it's been 3 years that this has been ongoing. And 3 years of women protesting, 3 years of women facing arbitrary detention, and 3 years of egregious violence being committed by the Taliban. Despite these immense challenges, through my work at DOSTI, I've met some of the most inspiring young Afghan women and girls who refuse to give up. They continue to stand up for their rights and find alternative ways to continue their education and also work. For instance, I met a few weeks ago, I met a young girl who's living in Kabul, who spent months sending hundreds of LinkedIn messages to anyone who could offer her help to find an opportunity to be able to continue her education. And her persistence actually paid off, and she was able to secure a scholarship through reaching out to as many people as she could. And this is just one story among many. There are countless young girls studying in secret schools across the country and are being taught by courageous local women and girls who risk their lives to ensure that education continues despite the oppressive environment. These women and girls give me the hope that situation can change. Their stories of perseverance and courage are a powerful reminder that even in the darkest time, the human spirit can find ways to shine. It is more important than ever to support these young leaders who will determine the future of Afghanistan and are the only hope for bringing peace and justice to the country. Their efforts need our recognition and it needs our support. But we should not forget that it is crucial that men and boys across Afghanistan become allies to women and girls. They need to collectively mobilize at the grassroots level to challenge the Taliban's unjust practices. The solidarity between young men and women is essential for creating a united front against the ongoing oppression. Only through grassroots mobilization by both women and men, we can hope to see a future where things improve for everyone. Unfortunately, we have yet to see this form of allyship from men in Afghanistan, and it is essential for this to change. and for men to protest alongside women and become their allies and supporters. The challenges are enormous, but so is the potential for the change. The youth of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, have shown remarkable resilience and commitment to their rights and their future. They're organizing, educating, empowering each other, often at great personal risk. This collective action is laying the groundwork for a future where equality, dignity, and respect are not just ideals, but they could be reality. That is why I believe that young people of Afghanistan are not just passive victims of the crisis, they are the active agents of change. They're fighting for their rights, finding innovative solutions to overcome barriers, supporting one another in most inspiring and humbling ways. Our roles as supporters and advocates is to amplify their voices and provide them with the resources they need, and stand with them in the struggle for a better future. And that is why at DOSTI, we're launching a fellowship to onboard 20 Afghan women and girls over the summer to provide them the support with accessing for leadership development, but also personal development, and to have a safe space where they could network with one another. I hope that more and more organizations offer such opportunities for women, but also for men to come together. It is the resilience and determination of these young Afghans that offer beacon of hope in the dark times, and their fight is our fight, and their success will be the triumph for all who believe in justice and human dignity.
Thank you, Sumaya, and we're very glad to hear about the fellowship, and hope you can send us a link so our attendees can also see it. And I will move on to Graham, and it will be the end of our panel. Considering the conversation here today, and considering the unique challenges faced by Afghan youth, what innovative approaches from other conflict zones, since you have a wealth of experience in your native South Africa and other conflict zones, what kind of innovative approaches and solutions could be adapted to support the peacebuilding efforts in Afghanistan?
Thanks, Nazila. I mean, I wouldn't presume to answer that nearly as well as I think Sumaya already has. You know, the reference to all of this sort of innovative creativity, resourcefulness, and resilience of young people, I think, is the key solution, and it's the key learning from other contexts. I do think there are still implicit dangers. I mean, even in what Professor Ibrahimi said when he talked about the sort of risk of radicalization of the future generation, that we actually represent this primarily by reference to young people as the danger. Like, you know, we need to understand the risk, we need to understand the circumstances under which they're operating, but we also need to recognize the pathways for investment have to be very different. They have to be about investment in the resilience, resourcefulness, the creativity, the alliances, the partnerships, all of the issues that Sumaya has, I think, described, rather than a highly securitized approach to this sort of dangerous group of future terrorists, right? And that's more challenging than we might like. The second issue that is really interesting to me is the sort of I guess it relates to this constant conversation about trust. And I think we need to start changing that conversation, because there is legitimate mistrust by young people who are marginalized, brutalized, and oppressed. And we need to start talking about trustworthiness and the need to build trustworthiness. We need to win the trust of young people rather than expect it, right? And that demands meaningful and structural change in these societies. And this is much harder to achieve in some contexts, and Afghanistan among others. There is a real gap in financing here. There is a rhetoric about the youth, peace, and security agenda globally, and very little resources actually invested in youth organizations, in youth leadership, in youth opportunities, etc., etc. And conversation, again, the rhetoric of localization is very easy, but unless this is defined, owned, shaped, and driven by young people who are not just the objects of the exercise, they aren't just the beneficiaries of this. We don't just talk about their agency, we recognize their leadership. And that's essentially about recognizing that young people need to be engaged in the design, in the implementation, and in the evaluation of these programs and these processes. And it's really critical that these things are much easier said than done in environments in which you have a recalcitrant government that is reluctant to do this or is eager to tokenize and manipulate young people rather than actually actively create these spaces, right? The mobilization of young people as the cannon fodder. Samaya said something breathtakingly challenging and enriching for me. She made it was speculative. I think, Samaya, if I misrepresent you, you'll correct me. She said something fascinating about would the circumstances in Afghanistan be different if young people were fully included in the peace process? And we can't afford to romanticize young people, just as we shouldn't be demonizing them. We shouldn't be romanticizing this. They are a microcosm of the whole society, right? But I think there is something there that is, for me, just resonates so powerfully. Maybe this is inspirational rather than real, okay, in terms of what's achievable. But in the listening we've done to young people in Northern Ireland in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement, in South Africa in the wake of the remarkable transition from apartheid, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, etc., in Guatemala in the wake of the 1996 peace accords, in Bosnia in the wake of Dayton and an externally mediated and highly problematic cementing of gains made by conflict in the peace process, in Burundi in the wake of the Arusha Accords, in Rwanda post-genocide. In all of these societies, fascinating these peace processes that were engaged in the 1990s. In every instance, the rhetoric is that these peace processes are supposedly in the name of future generations. They are supposedly in order to create an environment in which the future of young people in these societies will be different, that they will be protected from the cyclical patterns of violence and conflict. And in every single one of these societies, young people are looking back. The cohort of young people who are born after these things, who have inherited these things, are all looking back at these processes and saying this was all done in our name, but often without us, without young people in the room. And we want the right of review. We want to be able to look back at these things, engage us in a dialogue. You ask us what worked for this generation of young people and what didn't, and they'll give you incredible insights into the deficits and the limitations and the failures of these peace processes. And it's an incredible opportunity to host these dialogues, to allow young people to actually reflect on those things. But it also goes back to this critical thing that Samaya raised, which is maybe the participation and inclusion of young people changes the way we think about peace and changes the way we think about peace processes. Maybe it changes the way we think about prevention. It changes the way we think about transgenerational transmission of memory and trauma from one generation to the next. Young people in Northern Ireland weren't saying our parents' generation screwed this up. They were saying we need to understand why they went the way they did. We need to understand their trauma and their pain, but we also need to be able to reflect on what they did in our name that didn't actually work for us, right? And there is an incredibly powerful opportunity, instead of talking about future generations as if they are yet to be born, the future generations of those peace processes are in front of us right now. The exercise of listening to discourses among young people about how they understand these things can change the way we think about peace, can change the way we think about youth inclusion in peace processes, can fundamentally alter the way we think about transformation in our societies. So that the resilience, when we talk about young people, is not a survivalist view of the self-reliance, their ability to survive under the most terrible circumstances. Aren't they amazing? Because they are. But it's about saying, actually, this is about transformative resilience. It has to be about the transformation of these societies so that future generations of young people are not exposed to the same systematic patterns of violation and exclusion and brutalization of the past.
Thank you very much. That was very powerful, and I think this entire conversation has been very powerful and inspiring. I personally have been inspired, and I'm sure everyone in the audience has been. Now we open the floor very gratefully to our panelists and our discussants as well for a Q&A session and discussion segment. And we have a lot of young Afghan leaders in our audience, and as well as among our colleagues and fellows in the Afghanistan Policy Lab. But everyone else, feel free to raise questions, comments, share your experiences and your vision for peace in Afghanistan. And please feel free to raise your hands or type your questions in the chat box. Yes, Groundside, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nazila, for organizing this panel, and thank you, Graham and Nemat and Sumaya for taking your time to for this thoughtful contribution. I was reporting on youth in Afghanistan back in 2011 and 12 for Afghanistan Analysis Network, and I observed that the then leader of the Afghanistan Reconciliation Council and once the president of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the governor of Islamic government of Afghanistan, Burhanuddin Rabbani, were feeling some sort of pressure, political pressure, from the youth movements and groups who were copying, using social media from the Tunisian reformist movements who had coined under the Arab Spring. And Ustad Rabbani, the late Ustad Rabbani, was saying in a public statement, look, he was warning and addressing his subordinates, political leaders, that these Facebook boson, which means Facebook players, will take power from you guys. Get awake. And he was giving the instance of the what happened in Tunisia. What was happening in Tunisia, how youth movement used Facebook pages then in support of their activism, and what happened later on in Afghanistan, and how that Facebook page, which exactly was used in favor of those movements, how they used to manipulate youth activism in Afghanistan, propaganda and recruitment of radicalized groups through this among the generation who was emerging in Afghanistan. And later on, when the Afghanistan peace marchers started marching from Helmand in 2019 and 20, led by a group of youth, joined by a great deal of people from the previous generations too, how underreported that was through the mainstream media due to the pressure of the Taliban about reporting those the activities of this movement, and how unacknowledged that movement went. Today, we have some reporting from New York Times about those marchers, but not local media, local Afghanistan mainstream media. I'm covering this all up and want to put this up that one of those main tools that was used against the youth were these very luxurious or very used social media platforms to recruit them against all the human values into extremely radicalized groups, and how propaganda impacted their viewpoints, and how this whole social media hub become an oppressive mean for this young generation. And now, plus these madrasas, who are, as I saw in the report, a time bomb, not only threatening Afghanistan, but the wider region and the global order and security. So social media, propaganda, recruitment of youth, and now madrasas as official platforms, education platforms, to recruit, to radicalize, brainwash, and inject them in the whole societal system in Afghanistan and abroad, are the concerns that I wanted to raise and wanted to have your thoughts on it. Sumaya had mentioned the disillusionment, and Ibrahimi mentioned the discourse, how youth engaged in mobilizing political activism and political reforms in Afghanistan. Graham, your global experiences and scholarship about you. I would love to hear how could we address some of these with the youth in Afghanistan.
Analyst, if you can take 2 minutes to answer the question.
Can I start? Okay, I'll be very quick. I think maybe I also come back to the point which was mentioned by Mr. Simpson earlier. I think I may have left the implication that by bringing the issue of madrasa education, I am also sort of securitizing the youth as a threat to the future of Afghanistan. I think in the key point, I think, which is maybe coming back to the Grant's comment, is that I think youth people, need to have multiple opportunities. For that, you need to just look at the history of the Taliban, where the Taliban come from. Young people who are separated from their history, from their tradition, from their families, placed in this mass madrasas, where they are exposed to one particular worldview, right? And they don't have other alternative political, cultural, or economic models to look forward to. Of course, not everyone who goes to a madrasa become a Taliban ideologue, right? I mean, that is, we have seen that many people coming out of these madrasas turning against that. I think there are many examples of people, resisting, those sort of ideology from within these structures as well. But now I think the broader point I wanted to make, I think maybe also in a way respond to Grant's comment, is that, at the moment, other opportunities are extremely limited, narrowing. While, the opportunities for going to madrasa as a career, right, as a pathway for social mobility, for if someone wants to get job in the government, the people who have madrasa education, they're preferred over those who are university graduates. I think until very recently, there are thousands of people from madrasa graduates that were issued official certificate degrees, and they are all working in government positions. So that is creating different incentive structure for people to think about their long-term future prospects. And I think, just another very quick point here is, I think, also to think about the role of the diaspora in diaspora youth. I think, we have a very vibrant, globally connected, large number of diaspora. I think they can play quite an important role. That is, for thinking about long-term peace building initiative, reconciliation in Afghanistan. And I think diaspora is becoming a really important actor. So any future effort, I think we have the examples here. I think from the work Sumaya is doing and everybody else is doing, Nazila yourself. I think you have a lot of people who are based in different countries. They are connected, they are interested, and they are representing a more sort of diverse, pluralistic views of Afghanistan, which can offer better alternatives to the vision of the Taliban.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nematullah Ibrahimi. Any other panelists, if they want to comment on the question, and if other attendees and our discussants in the audience, they would like to. Please go ahead, Aya. Can you please briefly introduce yourself before raising the question? Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Ali. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Nazila, for organizing this important discussion. I think we should have more people like you at policy centers like the Afghan Policy Lab to pay attention to the youths. It was a great discussion by the panelists. I just had a question for Dr. Ibrahimi. Doctor, you discussed the radical exclusion and marginalization of youths from certain ethnic communities. You also warned about the far-reaching consequences of ongoing Taliban policy towards youths, whom you described as traumatized and vulnerable. And of course, sorry, I also forgot to introduce myself. I used to work with Afghanistan Analyst Network as GRAN, and I recently graduated from Columbia University. So my name is Ali Adili, and I also in my conversations with the youths back in Kabul, I also heard that those who are still working with the Taliban government, they are now attending religious lessons on daily basis. For example, those who work with the universities or ministries, they have to attend kind of religious lessons conducted by the Taliban's officials. We also heard that many of the young people who graduated from universities inside Afghanistan, but also outside the country, and started working with the government, they are especially from certain ethnic groups. I mean, non-Pashtuns, they are being replaced by people from the same ethnic group as the Taliban. And we also had like the experience of 1400 movement or Chordasat, which started as a cross-ethnic or multi-ethnic movement, but suffered divisions at key decision points. Given your work on contentious and ethnic politics, and especially one of your recent papers about ethno-nationalism and religious fundamentalism that underpin the Taliban's ideology, do you think that this ethnic dimension of the Taliban's ideology also attracts youths from who share the same ethnic background with the Taliban? And if yes, given the Taliban's, I think the Taliban's exclusions of youths, I was wondering if the Taliban's exclusion of the youths is mainly based on religious motives, or it also has some sort of ethnic dimensions. If it does, then do you also see some far-reaching consequences in terms of creating grievances among the youths from other ethnic communities? Thank you.
Ustad Nemat, if you can address the question shortly. Thank you.
I'll be very quick. I don't want to take everyone's time. I'm very pleased to have Ali Adili here, who has, I think, like Howard has done, both of them, a lot of fantastic research work on Afghanistan over many years. I think, really insightful literature produced by many people like yourself at AN. We are really grateful for that. Thank you for being here, both of you. Well, I think, maybe I come back to that article you mentioned recently, which came out in the Review of Faith International Affairs. I think the simple answer is that, the Taliban is not a monolithic, entity, either purely religious fundamentalist movement or any ethno-nationalist movement. And my argument in that paper is that what we are seeing with the Taliban is a process of hybridity. So that in a way, the Taliban is appropriating certain forms of ethno-nationalism and embedding that within certain type of religious narratives. And that has important consequences, I think, for all religious and ethnic groups in Afghanistan. I think for members of the Pashtun ethnic community in Afghanistan, I think the Taliban are predominantly Pashtun. They are also using violence. In that article, I argue to sort of redefine what does it mean to be Pashtun. And that involves persecution of quite significant segments of communities from within different communities of our Pashtuns in Afghanistan. I think we have seen that with repression in different parts of Afghanistan, especially places like Kandahar and others, where other groups are resisting Taliban. And then when it comes to other groups, I think that sort of intersectionality of religion and ethnicity, and I think also interests. I think, again, coming to youth, I think we should also come back to this idea of sort of, youths are not sort of one sort of monolithic, one group, right? They are driven by interest, incentive structures. And I think we don't have a space to go into great detail, but I think, generally we can see the Taliban as a very exclusionary, ethno fundamentalist group, which is, I think, having a quite important, profound impact on all groups, but especially on groups that are marginalized, including the Hazaras. I think certain parts of the Uzbeks and Tajiks are really feeling the brand of the Taliban's repression and brutality over the past few years, and they don't see the same sort of pathways in terms of participation in politics or economy the way members of other groups. So I think that can potentially exacerbate ethnic tensions in ways that we cannot imagine now. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much. I'm so sorry. This is a very important discussion, but we have to wrap up. And I will give the floor to Mr. Salah Rahmati to convey the closing remarks. Mr. Rahmati is a fellow at Princeton University's Afghanistan Policy Lab, and he has been a career diplomat and has overseen the peace negotiations in Doha. To shortly introduce him, since we have run out of time, and he is also currently researching peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan in the lab. Mr. Rahmati, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nazila. It's been really an honor to be part of this brilliant panel. And I'm mindful of time. You're running out of time, so I'll try to briefly summarize what has been an enlightening discussion. Firstly, I must extend a heartfelt thank you to Ambassador Ross for her insightful opening remarks, as well as her leadership, and to Nazila yourself, whose tireless efforts over the past month ensured the success of today's panel. Your commitment has truly brought us a discussion as impactful as it was necessary. We are also grateful for the presence of Dina Mani and the robust support of Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs, which continues to play a pivotal role through the Afghanistan Policy Lab in shaping thoughtful discourse on critical issues related to Afghanistan. Today, our panel has vividly painted the complex tapestry of challenges and opportunities in Afghanistan. It's clear that while the current absence of open conflict might give them the illusion of peace, what Afghanistan needs is the establishment of positive peace, a state where justice, human dignity, and the voices of all citizens, especially that of youth, are not just heard, but are integral to shaping the governance structure in the country. With Afghanistan youth making up nearly 64% of the population, their potential to be agents of change is undeniable, yet underutilized. And I think this is something that every panelist have expressed concern over. Their exclusion from meaningful roles in peace process is not just a loss, but a missed opportunity for transformative change. The situation on the ground is dire, with economy on the brink, extreme poverty affecting nearly the entire population of the country, significant humanitarian aid shortfalls, and an environment where women's rights are severely restricted, positioning Afghanistan at the bottom of the global gender equality rankings. With these harsh realities, the road to healing and reconciliation in Afghanistan is fraught with even more challenges, not least of which is the current regime's exclusionary policies, particularly against the Afghan woman. However, today's discussion also brings us hope, hope in the form of actionable steps and collaborative efforts that can bridge divides. We talked about the importance of establishing civic spaces to foster dialogue and education, despite the challenges. This is crucial for expanding civic engagement and ensuring that a multitude of voices can be heard. As we look forward, let us carry forward the spirit of today's discussion. Today's panel marks just the beginning of a series of engagements by Afghanistan Policy Lab aimed at highlighting the indispensable role of the Afghan youth in fostering peace and stability in Afghanistan. In closing, I thank all of you for your participation and contributions today. Your engagement is vital as we continue to strive for a peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan. We eagerly anticipate your continuing these discussions, building on the foundations we have laid today, and moving ever closer to a reality where peace is defined by the prosperity and freedom of all Afghan citizens. Thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. And that concludes our today's panel. We wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.